I know this takes a few seconds for it to come up, but it looks like we're off and running. Do a quick check of the audio here, making sure I can hear it. Hang on. It is so much more challenging when you do this by yourself. I am not hearing any audio back. 1 second. Let's see. Come on, where's my chat? There we go, chat. Yep. That shocked look back in the mirror when I don't see anything. I'm not seeing. Let's do this. Oh, that's why. Start the audio engine. Speakers. Hey? Yeah, that's better. All right, so you guys can hear me, which is great. So sorry about that. Let's try this again. So welcome everyone. Rich Ross here with another episode of Philly.net, live streaming all remotely again, and looking to now I'm trying to see where my audio is coming back out. Looking to see what we can do to do another session here. One thing we do want to make sure you're aware of is that we are going to be, this is our last time of streaming on Mixer actually, and starting forward next week, we are going to be, if I bring up my screen here, where's my computer? There we go. So we bring up my computer. We can see that here we are in Mixer. A little bit of, yeah, that happens. But coming up next week, we will be, or in 2 weeks, when we do this again, we'll be over on Twitch. And our Twitch show will be the same content we've been bringing to you for, you know, the 2.5 years that we've been doing this. But what we'll do is essentially be streaming just to here and to YouTube, all via the magic of Restream. So that is something to be looking forward to over the course of the next few weeks as we get back to it. And we got a bunch more announcements to coming. We'll do that at the break at the halfway point. But what I want to announce, and I should have asked them how many times they've been renewed, but our 2 recurring MVPs, Microsoft MVPs, for the work that they do in the community, and let's bring in Rob and Bill, and they can, as we bring them back up on the audio here. Guys, how many times have you been renewed?
I think 11 or 12. I don't know. I'd have to look.
Awesome.
You don't have a tattoo for that, or
Not yet. No.
okay.
I know you do, but you know the rest of stuff.
Yeah, but mine's worn away. But yeah, I've been 18 years, 17 awards. There was a time when they didn't do it every year. I think I got stretched out in the beginning. Yeah. But it's been a wonderful program to be part of, and looking forward to another good year of community stuff.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, I will let you guys take it away. I think, Rob, you're going to go first. When you're ready,
Yep.
You can share your screen, and we'll make sure it's all visible in the window there.
Well, I'm not going to share it right this second, but
Oh,
I will in a minute.
sorry.
So, give me a minute.
I'm producing along here. Come on, let's go.
I know. All right, fine. I'll just show it now. What the heck? Let's see. I got to find the right one.
Yep.
Oh, there it is. All right. How's that?
Looks good.
Good. All right. So, I am going to be talking about Windows Terminal, and there are 2 versions of Windows Terminal. We're going to talk about both of them, and also WSL. So, if you guys want to follow along with this, because this is normally the time of the month when we do the hands-on labs, we'll try to go a little slower and not just pump through this real quick, and see if we can get you to follow along. I will say that some of the things you'll have to do if you haven't gotten installed yet, you will have to reboot the machine. So you may not want to follow past that point. to go any farther, unless you've got a separate machine you can work with. So, Windows Terminal. So you can get this from the store. As you can see, this is the Windows Terminal. I just went to the store. You can download it from there, and it's a nice little, you know, command line interface. But it's got some advantages over PowerShell command line and CMD in that it's a tabbed interface. So if we bring this up, I've got it up here. Let's just close that for a second, the background. And this is the Windows Terminal interface. And you can see I've got a PowerShell tab here, and I've got a Command Shell here, both running at the same time. That's pretty cool. It's really nice, actually. And this is the, if we go to About, this is the actually released 1.0 version of the Windows Terminal, which is good. So it's pretty nice. You can sit there and you can open up multiple windows. You can see here I've got a couple different command lines I can open up. I can open up multiple PowerShell windows if I want to. I can open up multiple command lines if I want to. And then there's Linux also. I can open up that as well, which I have smaller. One of the things I found out about, well, I guess it was probably last week or so, a guy I was working with, he wanted to do a demo, and he was going to use the Windows G, so the game bar, to do the recording. And he was going to do something in command prompt, and he couldn't do it because Windows G doesn't work that way. But this is a UWP application, so this works fine if you want to do some demos and record your stuff using the Windows game bar. So that's pretty cool. Overall, it's you know, it just does what it's going to do. So the other nice thing about this is the settings. So there are a lot of settings you can add to your, let me zoom this in a little bit, because I always forget where that is, but oh, it's around here somewhere. Appearance, zoom, full screen, nah. Zoom in, there it is. Control equals. I don't know why it's control equals instead of, there we go. So there is a complete JSON file sitting out there. And if you go into settings, it will open up in whatever editor you have assigned to your JSON commands, JSON files. And you can see here there are a lot of command keys that you can modify. By the way, I'm running this on a version of Windows that is the pre-release. And there's a reason for that later on, I'll explain. But so this is my play machine, so I don't have everything set up the way I would for normally doing work. But you can set all that stuff up. You can set up different commands. And then if we go farther down, we'll see there are profiles set up down here. And the profiles are how it figures out what to display or what to run in the different tabs. So this one is the PowerShell profile, and this is a arbitrary GUID that gets set for it. And at the top, there is a default GUID that gets loaded. So when I hit the plus key, so if we move this out of the way for a second, this plus key up here, it's going to open up the default profile. In my case, it's PowerShell for this one, and that's the default when you first get it. And you can change that if you don't want it to be that way. And the other things you can see here, you've got different background colors, cursor shapes, font faces that you can change. You can change the font sizes. All that stuff's in here, including icons and some other stuff. This is the command line profile, and this is using a color scheme called Campbell. And if we look farther down, I'll go down here, you can see that there are a bunch of schemes set up with different colors settings, different backgrounds, different foregrounds, all that stuff is set up. Now this is the version 1.0, and I was using, before the version 1.0, I was using the beta, so there is, at some point, they did make some changes to this JSON file. I don't know if you still get all the schemas in there, but we're going to look at the new one in a second, and we'll see what the difference is. All right, so let's go back here for a second. Let's close out some of these guys. So that's wonderful. You can do all that stuff. What else can you do? Well, if I wanted to, I could open up multiple panes inside of a single tab, which comes in handy. So if I'm in the if I'm in the command line and I want to open up the Windows PowerShell, I can do that. And if I can remember what it is, it's Alt Shift. And now I've got a PowerShell command line interface here. So we can do like alias. And I've got, you know, my command line over here. So they're both running at the same time. No issues. I can't remember what it is now. That's CLS, isn't it? That's the only problem with running multiple things at once. You have to remember what all the commands are for all of them now. And I can switch between these with some arrow keys. So if I wanted to, I could do an Alt key and go back and forth between the two. I don't have to use the mouse to do it. So I could do it like that. I can expand it even farther. So if I do another Shift plus, I get that. If I do a Alt Shift minus, it goes this way. So you can see you can have way too many, and you wouldn't be able to tell what the heck's going on if you had too many of these things. Let me make it bigger here. And you can also resize these if you wanted to. So if I hold down the Alt key and sorry, the Alt key is what makes me go between two. If I hold Shift Alt and move the arrows, I can resize the panes. So if I need to make that smaller and I want this one bigger, I can do it like that, and that can resize them that way. You can't really resize with the mouse. It's you know, it's a command line, so they figure you're going to have your hands on the keyboard more than anything else. So that's pretty cool. But you can do some other things too. Right now, every time I hit the Alt plus or Alt minus key, the extra pane that gets added is my default one. In the next version, we'll see how that's different. But I can open up, and how I got some of these other things to work is, well, first of all, the reason why I had two different ones running here is because I started in my command, and when I hit the Alt plus, it opened up the PowerShell one. That makes sense. But I could, if I wanted to, there is an actual WT command for Windows Terminal. And I could set up a command line entry that would allow me to open up a window with multiple things all at once, which is what I just did here. So you can see there's a WT command, split pane. So WT by itself is going to open up the default, which is my PowerShell, which is what this one is over here. That's this one. The split pane says to open up the command. That's the profile. That's what the P is for, command. And that's what opened up here. And then I did another split pane, and I said Ubuntu 1804, and that's what opened up here. So I've got Ubuntu running there. I've got command here. And I've got, you can do anything you want there. PowerShell running there. So that's pretty cool. All right. So, any questions? I don't see any questions. All right.
Hey, Rob,
Next,
nothing.
We'll go.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. Nothing in the chat. But
Okay.
question for you, I don't know if you mentioned this, that highlighted piece in the background, is that related to your repositories, or is that just
The
file?
highlighted piece in the background. This stuff here,
Yeah.
that's just the way Linux shows the. I did a listing.
Gotcha. It's not like a PoshGit or something like that, because I know there's a Linux version of that too. So I was just kind of
There
curious.
is, and I don't have that installed on this one, but yes, you could do that if you wanted to.
Cool. Sorry.
Oh, so one thing I forgot to do, and I'm glad you interrupted me there. So the other thing we want to look at real quick is the ability for me to start up from within. Oh, I'll do that in a second. I changed my mind. So let's go on to Windows Terminal 2 or Preview. So that's the newer one, is the Windows Terminal Preview. And again, you can go to the store, and if you search for Windows Terminal, there is a preview version. You can run them both at the same time. You don't have to worry about running one or the other. And I have this one installed as well. So let me start this one up here. And this is, again, I didn't change the PowerShell. I did play around a little bit with some of the settings, just so you can see what's going on here. I'll make that a little bit bigger. One thing you can do here, which is nice, is you can open up a different pane by holding the Alt key down and clicking on these, and it'll open up the pane. So yeah, I was playing around with the background. I put a background image on that one. And I can do it again, hold the Alt key down, and let's open up Ubuntu here. And that'll open up Ubuntu, except it didn't do it the way I wanted it to do it, but that's okay, because you got to hold the right key down. There it goes. So there's Ubuntu down here. And I could also get rid of these as well, and that's Control-Shift-W will close the pane. I didn't say that before. It works in both of them, no big deal. But this part only works here, so holding the Alt key down only works inside of the preview version. Okay. So let's take a look at the settings for this one now, just to see what the difference of the file looks like. And you still go in, and it's still a JSON file. And let me make this bigger so we can see a little bit more of it. So this one, remember I said there's a default profile. That's where that gets set right there. This one is a little shorter, has a few less things. That they combined a few things. They made a few things available by default. Before, the color schemes and everything, you had to set them up by separately. And now there's some default color schemes. So in here, there's a solarized dark. That's what I used for the PowerShell one, which I don't have to have the actual schema for. And then this is the command prompt. So that's got the background image that I stuck in there, and I put it at the bottom right, just to be fun. There's the Ubuntu 18.04. There's the Ubuntu 20.04, and that's got the Philly.net PNG in the top right corner. And that one is using color scheme 1/2 dark. And then I've got an Azure Cloud Shell as well. So you can see down here, I don't have any schemas set up. So I'm just using the default schemas for everything I'm doing here. And then there's just the same thing as there was before, except that these command lines are commands and actions, and keystrokes are down at the bottom of the screen here, bottom of the file. But other than that, it's all pretty much the same. So that's fun. I haven't had any problems running the preview version. When I actually use it on my real machine, I do use the preview version. It seems to be a little smoother, even though it is a preview, but your mileage may vary. So there you go. All right. So any questions about that? All right. So let's talk about WSL. So what is WSL? So you already seen me running an Ubuntu here, and you've seen me run an Ubuntu over here. The interesting thing about these two different screens, this one is using WSL1 and the other one's using WSL2. So what's the difference between the two? Well, WSL1 is sort of, yeah, you can think of it as just sort of being layered on top of Windows. So all the Linux commands are mapped into actual commands that the system can run. So yes, there is a Windows subsystem for Linux sitting out there, but it's not actually running a Linux kernel. And WSL2 does run a Linux kernel. So let's see if we can figure out how to get this thing set up. So for WSL1, it comes in Windows 10. I think it's been there since last year sometime. And all you have to do is turn on the Microsoft subsystem for Linux. You can do that two different ways. You can do it right from a command shell. And so if you opened up PowerShell and you ran this command, I know it's kind of big, what that'll do is that will go into your Windows features and turn on Windows subsystem for Linux. Now, if all you want to do is run WSL1, this is enough. You might have to do you should do a restart after you set this. And then when you come back in again, I would suggest you go out and you get a version of Linux that you want to run downloaded from the store. So let's take a look and see what's out there. There are plenty of Ubuntus. We'll look at let's look at this one. So there's the 1804. That's the one I'm running right now on this version of WSL. And it's the long-term support version. So you can go out, you download this. There's some instructions on how to, what you're supposed to do to get started. You start it up. It'll take a little bit of time because it has to unpack the Ubuntu image. And then you'll have to log in. You'll have to give it a username and a password. And you remember it because that's what you're going to be using to get into all the Linux stuff. So that should get you started in doing WSL. And for the most part, it works the way you'd expect Linux to work. There aren't too many surprises. It just does what it's supposed to do. And you can see that it's just running a Linux. I've already logged into this. This is me. So what's interesting about it is I can go to my documents from within Linux. I can take a look. I can see those are my files that are sitting out there, not too much. I've got a vin sitting out there. So let's do a cat on the vin.txt. And you can see it goes out and it reads it fine. Everything works the way it's supposed to. One of the nice interfaces, especially if you're using code, Visual Studio Code, is that you can start up a version of Visual Studio Code right from within the Linux distro. And it's going to unpack all my stuff here, but eventually we'll get there. It goes. Started up Linux. And it's telling me I've got yes, I have to allow some interface things here. So yeah, go ahead, do it. So this is my documents folder because that's where I was sitting when I opened up the code. And there is that, that vin.txt file. I have vins because that's what I work with some of those during the day. And down here you can see that I'm connected to the WSL Ubuntu 1804. So this is pretty cool. And if I open up a terminal like you would normally do from within code, I'm in Linux in here as well. So again, I'm just running Linux inside the code editor. So that's pretty cool too. All right, so that's pretty standard stuff, pretty easy to get set up. It's really not that difficult, doesn't hurt anything if you want to do it, and you can go out and you can experiment with Linux if you want to. But because this is doing a translation between Linux commands and Windows, not every command works. And when there's updates to Linux commands, they may not work exactly the same way in this version of WSL. So what they decided to do was come out with a new version of WSL. And for that, you have to add a little bit more. You have to add another command in. Let's see where I had my. I keep doing it that way. You have to add this other command. The difference between the two is that this one sets you up for a virtual machine platform. So you can see that now we're enabling a different feature, a virtual machine platform feature. So WSL2 is running inside of a Hyper-V version of, or an instance, and it's running a true Linux kernel. So you're actually running Linux inside your Windows machine instead of running that pseudo Linux in WSL1. And with it comes a few commands. So let's go back to my other window. Let's start up another one. So just like WT had some commands, WSL has a couple commands too. So one of them is you can, once you get things set up, you can set, no, you can't see that. Why can't you see that? Well, that's just terrible. Huh. It's probably not going to work in this one. Set default version, and you can set whichever version you want to be the default. So you can set it to 2 or you can set it to 1. I have mine set to default to 2 because I like version 2 better. But if you're running something that requires version 1, then you should use version 1. The things you might need that require it would be things like if you're developing a some Windows software, but you want to use Linux to do the development work, so you're using code under Linux and doing all that way, you're better off using WSL1 for something like that. If you're building something that is strictly running in Linux, then you should use WSL2 because things work better there. And the reason why they work better, again, is because they're running a true kernel inside of a Hyper-V instance. And in a minute, I'm going to show you what that entails and what that means. So I'm going to run that command, or I'm not going to run that command. I am going to take a look from within here. Let's see. It's a -L-V. I'm sorry you can't see that. I will have to fix my my colors. So let me go back in there and fix that real quick. So I picked what I thought would be a nice one. Let's just get rid of that and save the file. And you go back to here, and now it's fixed. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? All right, so you can see everything you do that you fix inside your settings file instantly shows up over here. So I did a WSL-L-V, so it lists verbose. So you can see that my 1804 version of Ubuntu is running in version 1 of WSL, and my Ubuntu 20.04 is running in version 2 of WSL. So that's pretty cool. You can also see some Docker stuff here. I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. So what does that mean? Well, when I start up my Ubuntu over here, you're not going to see much difference, but I can tell you that it does run faster in certain things. And if I go, let's go back to, I can still see, as you can still see, I can see my all my Windows files, but to get to the Windows files, and this is why you want to switch between WSL1 and WSL2, going to get the Windows files is slower in WSL2 than it is in WSL1 because It's more native for WSL1. So what they want you to do is they want you to use the Linux file system when you're working with WSL2. So this is running inside of a Linux file system. This is my home screen, right? Or home directory. So again, I can still do the same thing I did before. I can open up a code window. But I want to show you something here, and that is, so this is my bash shell and stuff like that. If I go in here and I say, well, show me that in Reveal and Explorer, because you can do that, what it's going to do is it's going to open up, and you see it's in network, WSL, Ubuntu, home, Rob. So it's somewhere on the network, not really, it's in a Hyper-V. And if we look down here, we can see here's a couple of things that I had previously installed using that Hyper-V, and this is where that stuff is. So it's not in my Windows file system. So I can't as easily get to it as I could when I was using WSL1, because that's all using Windows file system. This is using a Linux file system, so it's a little different. All right. So that's that. I don't want to take up too much more time. Just a couple more things. One is Docker. So Docker knows about WSL 2. So you can see right there, it says WSL integration. If I select that, it says I want to enable integration with my default WSL distro, and it's on Ubuntu 20.04. I could, if I had other distros installed for WSL2, they would show up here in a list, and I could turn them on or off and do it that way. So what does this mean? This means that we're not running through the Windows system to get to the Hyper-V to do the Linux, to do the Docker install on a Linux. We're just using that Linux kernel that we've already got installed, so that's a little bit faster to work with. And you can see, if I come over here and do Docker PS, I don't have anything running. I do have an image. So I could do Docker start and start up that Alpine image from right here. Let's see, Alpine Ash. And I didn't do it right because for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. Oh, sorry, Docker run, not Docker start. My bad. It happens when you type and talk at the same time. So now I'm inside the Docker container running Alpine, right? So there you go. It's just that easy to start it up. I can exit it out, and we're good to go. So that's a nice thing where Docker is just built right in and talks directly to your WSL2 system. Very nice. And the one thing you have to remember, if you want to develop Docker or if you want to develop .NET code, this is a plain vanilla Linux install. So you do have to install a couple of things like .NET if you wanted to. I did install .NET on this, so it's there. But I did have to do an apt-get, follow the instructions on how to install .NET on a Linux install, and it works just fine. So if I do a .NET run, you can see that I'm running some .NET code that I just did a .NET new on, and it was a Hello World console application. So that's WSL2. You need, to run WSL2, you need the May release, the 2004 release of Windows 10. So if you don't have that, you can't run WSL2. For some reason, my Surface Book says it's not ready to install that yet, so I can't run it on that one. But this is, like I said, a play machine I have been hanging out with. All right, so one final thing. Let's see, what else do I got here? Yeah, all right. So Bill's going to talk about PowerShell, unless there's any questions. Any questions before I pass it over to Bill? So I am running inside of Ubuntu 18.0 whatever, and I am running PowerShell. Was it 7, something like that?
Do a $ PS version table.
$sign. What was that?
PS version table.
Yep. And we do have a question when you get a chance.
Oh, all one word.
There you go.
So you're running PowerShell 7. Well done.
Yep, 7. So there you go. I am running PowerShell 7. You can see it's running on a Linux distro. This will not, as Bill found out, will not work on the latest version of Ubuntu. You need the older version, the 1804 or whatever it is. So what was the question?
So the question was, does it create a separate disk partition for the Linux file system?
It creates a Hyper-V machine for WSL2.
Yep. Yeah, I believe that's what it's referencing.
Yes. It's a complete Hyper-V machine that's sitting out there. So
there's a Hyper-V, there's a file somewhere.
Yep.
Where's the Hyper-V image?
Correct.
But it's not a separate disk partition.
Correct.
So, fascinating stuff.
Yep.
All right.
You all wrapped up there,
So there
Rob?
you go. What was that?
Are you wrapped up there, Rob?
I think I am.
All right. I'm going to
Bill's
take
going to tell
over.
you why you'd want to run PowerShell.
I'll tell you after Rich does his announcement.
Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, you tried the segue, and I'm blowing up the segue here. Let's see. So,
right.
sorry about that. We'll bring it back to me.
No worries.
And what I'm going to do is going to do a couple of announcements as we kind of transition over between Rob and Bill there. What I wanted to just bring to everybody's attention, just make a reiterating the announcement that we are moving from Mixer to Twitch, and I posted some links in the chat in both places. So regardless of where you're watching us, if you wouldn't mind at some point during the evening to go and click on one of those links and sign up and register over there, either at twitch.tv/philly.net or youtube.com/philly.net. Either one of those would be great. This way we can keep you guys all informed of when we go live and the various events that we have here. But a couple other things I just want to bring to your attention, because we've got some other events happening as well. And as you can imagine, with everything going on, those other events are also virtual as well. So here we have essentially an event that's happening in about 2 weeks, 12 days. They got a great countdown clock there for us. And coming up on July 21st to the 23rd is, I guess, that's 3-day virtual event around our Microsoft 365 products. So think of the old SharePoint Saturday events. This is kind of a rebranding of that, focusing on all of the cool things that are there in the Microsoft 365 platform. So it's no longer just SharePoint. There's Teams, obviously there's OneDrive, there's Exchange, all of those great features, plus the security features we have in there that keeps all of those, everybody protected essentially. So you can go out there to SPS events, and I'll post this link in the chat so we have it, where you can get more information. You can register if you're interested in speaking, because they are still looking for speakers. There's a link here on the sessions where you can go ahead and submit your session now as well. So if you've got something of interest that falls in that Microsoft 365 or M365 space, I'd love to see you come out there and present. It's going to be virtual, so you don't have an audience standing in front of you. It's just you and the camera and the chat room. So great opportunity to present if you haven't done a presentation before. Some of the other presentations that are coming along is there's a great conference coming up at the end of the month, and that's a .NET Conf. This is one of those specialty ones. They've done this, I think we did a Blazor one back in January. There was a Xamarin one in March. Here we are in July. They're doing a .NET conference focused on microservices. So if you're doing anything in the microservices space, you're interested in doing something about microservices, whether it's, I'm sure there's going to be some kind of a containers Kubernetes portion of a talk in here, but then obviously some of the content here with .NET Core. Do we have an agenda for this, or it's just to save the date at this point? So you can take a look at some of the great speakers there with Brendan Burns, who's one of that's along with Kelsey Hightower, some of the co-creators of Kubernetes, that great orchestration engine that many people use when they're doing microservices, as well as a whole host of other great speakers coming along for this day-long session. So mark your calendar for that. 21 days away from that event. Another event that's a little closer is this one here called Powerful Devs, and that is one that is coming up very quickly. That is next week, July 15th. This might be something a little new to you if you've not done anything from a development if you've not done anything around codeless development, things like the Power Platform, Power Apps, Microsoft Automate, Power Platform, all of those tools can create some really great applications for the business team and the business users, but they don't require code skills beyond kind of what you can do in an Excel macro. But there's some great crossover between enabling those tools for the business and what we do as back-end developers, and enhancing some of our skills to make the communication happen between both of those platforms. So there's a great set of sessions happening. It's a day-long conference with a opening keynote by Scott Guthrie and Maria Nagaga, and then a whole bunch of applications and pointed sessions inside of there that would be great if you're a developer. These are the things you kind of need to be aware of that are at the edge of development set of skills, if you will.
Rich, do they call their MVPs Power Rangers?
I don't believe they do. I think they are still just MVPs. Although they do have a red and the blue. I get okay. One other thing to mention, this is a weekly Friday session that's been going on with the Nova SQL user group, so the Northern Virginia SQL user group. Mentioning this here because obviously you guys are all up in the Philadelphia area, but everything's virtual now. So the ability to check out what other user groups are doing and not having to drive the 4 hours to get down to where they are in Virginia, you can just basically hop on your computer like you're doing tonight and watch them. Mentioning this one because we have someone who's been a longtime friend of Philly.net. Louis Berman is doing a session this Friday at 11:30 to 12:30, focused on going serverless with Cosmo DB and Azure Functions and Blazor. And if you've not heard Louis, he does a great talk around our serverless features in Azure, Cosmo DB Functions, and then now he's added Blazor into the mix. So this is definitely be a great talk. I'm sure it's a lot he's going to pack in there in an hour. If you register for this event on Meetup, then you'll get the link here, up here. I tried it out, it does work. You just have to say you're going to attend and you get the link showing up. And I think that is it for...
I will work with Rich and get links to all these things, and I will send out an email to Philly.net membership tomorrow, and we'll see if we can drum up some business for these.
Excellent.
And while we're on this topic, we are going to have a meeting in 2 weeks. We're still working on the speaker details, so we'll have a general meeting at 7 o'clock, and that'll be on the 22nd. And then just as a placeholder, the first Wednesday in August, we will have another hands-on lab, and Rob and I are going to show you how to use Live Share, which is part of Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code.
Awesome, Bill. Thank you. And I will let you continue the segue that Rob so expertly set up and I quashed. So it is on you for PowerShell there.
All right, let me see if I can share something interesting. Oh God, I'm actually showing us. That's scary. All right. PowerShell. Why did we have this presentation? And the stuff that Rob showed you is very pertinent because a lot of developers are more interested in cross-platform. Cross-platform almost always means running something on Linux. And the reason we run on Linux oftentimes has to do with containers. So when Rob showed you Docker, that sort of ties everything together. So a lot of applications now are containerized. That means they run on Linux. And one of the reasons you would use WSL is so that you have a native Linux distro on your machine that you can practice against or code against and test. Now, lots of people have experience in Linux and they use what's called the bash shell. And there's a whole series of command line operatives that get things done in Linux, but not everybody knows those. The last thing Rob demoed was the ability for Microsoft PowerShell to also run on Linux. That is actually not new. They've been working on that for 3 or 4 years, but they're really getting it so that it's feature parity with what you can do on Windows. So when we say PowerShell 7, that's the newest release of PowerShell, and that is cross-platform, and it almost matches the Windows version, which is PowerShell 5. So that's the reason people are getting interested in PowerShell, because there's a lot of IT administrators that automate all of their operations around PowerShell scripts, functions, and modules, and they want to be able to manage their Linux containers the same way they manage their Windows virtual machines. That's where PowerShell fits in. So let's do a real quick little history lesson here. I don't use slides, I just use text. So basically, oh, no, wait a second. I have to stop. We have a spelling mistake. There we go. Okay, so Microsoft wanted to basically compete against Bash 20 years ago or so, and they got a bunch of engineers together and they created something called the Monad Project. The Monad Project turned in to the first release of PowerShell, which is in 2006. Does anyone know what they were going to use prior to PowerShell to do scripting? Thanks for all answering. Basically, they were using VB script and something called C script, and those didn't go over very well in the IT community, so that's why they invented this thing called PowerShell. So basically, it's a command line shell and a scripting language all rolled into one. And it comes with a whole bunch of built-in commands. Right now, there are over 1,500 of them. They're called commandlets. You can spell out the word command if you want, but usually in the world of PowerShell, we abbreviate it to CMDLETS. A commandlet has a formal name. It can also have a short nickname, which we refer to as an alias. When you run a commandlet, it can have parameters. They can be name parameters or positional, and you can use either one. Now, what's really clever about PowerShell is the way it does pipeline chaining. So what that means is one command can output an object informational in the form of objects and pass it to another command. And you can chain these along the way, separating them with vertical bars. And that gives you a lot of power. You could, go out and get a list of services, then you could select a couple of properties, and then you could send it to a grid on the screen. So you compose one-line powerful statements in PowerShell using pipeline chaining. In addition to that, you're going to see in the demo a thing called a provider. A provider basically gives you something that is a data store. The most common provider is the Windows file system. You can also use Active Directory. You can use the registry. You can use lots of things like SQL Server and actually interact with it very quickly with a command line operator. If you get more complex PowerShell, you can combine it into functions. You can make it into scripts. The difference is a function is sort of in memory. A script is actually saved in a file. If you get very complex scripts, you can create modules, which are reusable pieces of code. Think of it sort of like a NuGet package. And you can then download modules to enhance the capabilities of your local instance of PowerShell. We won't have time tonight to show you remoting, but remoting allows you to run PowerShell commands on other servers. And the work I do, I manage about 900 servers for my client, and remoting becomes very important because you don't want to have to keep logging into all these different servers. You just talk to them from your laptop using the remoting feature. And finally, I'll finish with the fact that in 2016, Microsoft took PowerShell, turned it into open source, which means it's available on GitHub. You can contribute. When they did this, they also came out with a version of PowerShell that's .NET Core. Now, if you didn't know this, all of PowerShell is based on .NET. So in the old days, it used to be like .NET 2, then .NET 3, so on and so forth. And basically, the newest version, which is 6 and 7, they're based off of .NET Core, and the Core means that it can run cross-platform and run on environments like Linux. The first version of this had a limited set of commandlets that it wasn't the full experience. What's exciting about version 7, which is just right now, it's the newest version is in preview. This actually gets you up to the 1,500 commandlets that you're used to working in Windows, and those commandlets work now both in Windows and Linux. So how do you run this darn thing? Well, if you just click on the bottom of your screen and you type PowerShell, there is a thing called Windows PowerShell. That brings up a command line interface, and you can do things like, say, aliases. Whoops, alias. So that's pretty easy to do. And the other thing that I've already mentioned is there is a way to ask, what version am I running? And that would be PowerShell version table. And you'll see that the default PowerShell on a Windows 10 release is now at 5.1. And notice that it is backwards compatible with 1, 2, 3, and 4. It uses in the background something called WSL stack, and it uses PS remoting. So those are all built-in Windows features that allow you to run this across to different machines. So that is one way to run it, but we don't like that. So let's get rid of it. The next thing we're going to search for is ISE. I've been using this for years. And ISE is the integrated script environment. And it's what you run things like PowerShell commands. Now, the nice thing about this is that it has a built-in editor with some color coding, and it allows you to save this as a PS1 file, which would then become a saved script that you would run over and over again. That's sort of interesting. We're not going to use that either. We're going to get rid of that. Okay, now, see how it says start as admin? I'm going to show you a cool trick. So down on the bottom here, I've got a whole bunch of programs that I play with. But if we go to PowerShell here, what I'm going to do is right-click, and then I'm going to go to PowerShell, I'm going to right-click again, and I'm going to go to Properties. And this is an important thing to know. If you go to the shortcut and you click Advanced, you can click this button that says, anytime I run this, I want to run as administrator. And the reason that's important, watch what happens. I click that, oops, I think it was already running. Whoops, stop it. When I click this, it actually comes up with my prompt that lets me elevate my permissions. And the reason that's important is a lot of things that IT administrators do require that you run as administrator when you're changing very important settings in your registry or in your configuration of your machine. PowerShell is used extensively in DevOps practice, and there's something in PowerShell called DSC, desired state configuration, and that is a way to make sure all your machines have absolutely the right settings every time you are running in production. And basically what that means is I have a set of PowerShell scripts that checks everything and makes sure that it is correct. Okay, so now we know how to run this as administrator. That's sort of nice. We can do that. I'm not going to demonstrate this today, but be aware that Visual Studio Code also has a third-party extension. It's actually made by Microsoft that allows you to run and debug and test PowerShell right within VS Code. And the other thing you can do is you can start from a command prompt. So here we are in a command prompt. We can do a directory, not much going on there. same old stuff. Now, if I type PowerShell, watch what happens. It goes into PowerShell. So if I say $PS version table, it tells me I'm at PS 5.1. Well, that's not bad. And since I'm in here and I invoked PowerShell by typing PowerShell, then if I type alias, it actually color codes it and it runs a PowerShell command. That's pretty useful. Now, this is standard 5.0 PowerShell, which is based on .NET Framework 4.7, somewhere around there. What if I want to run the new PowerShell 7? What I do then is I do this, PWSH. And when I do PWSH, it shows me a version of PowerShell I have running. Later on, I'll show you the version 7, but this is version 6.2. So the idea is that you can run the PowerShell core version side by side with the built-in PowerShell. It's based on .NET Framework. And they all work and do the same basic stuff. All right, so that's just a half a dozen ways to start PowerShell. But since Rob wowed you with this thing called Windows Terminal, let's go a little further with that. So I'm going to take my Windows Terminal, and I'm going to drop down, and I'm going to say, ooh, look at all them PowerShells up there. Wonder what they do. So let's open this PowerShell, and let's do $PS version table. And that's version 5.1. Okay, so that seems to be similar to the standard PowerShell window that comes with Windows, but it's just easier because we have the tabs and all the fancy commands that Rob showed you to handle all the windows. What's really important to me is this beautiful new font they have, and I think it's Consolus. And this, to me, is much more readable than the standard font that we're used to seeing in the Windows command line. So that's pretty handy. Now let's drop this down and see what else we got. Aha! So there's another PowerShell window. Ah, so that is actually PowerShell 7. And using the various profiles, I'm able to call that directly. And, you know, I don't have to do this since you already see it, but it'll actually tell you it's the preview and it's .NET Core and all that nonsense. And what else do I got here? I also got something called PowerShell .NET Global, and that one actually comes up with PowerShell Core, but not the preview in case you want to run something that you know works in 6 and doesn't work in 7. All right, so that was fun. I'm going to close one or two of these down, and I'm going to clear the screen. Next thing I'm going to do is talk to you about how to learn. So if you want to learn PowerShell, the thing to do is go to the Microsoft Docs. And to do that, I'm going to call up this. And if we take and go to this URL, so that's docs.microsoft.com, ENUS, which would be your language specifier. Of course, you can have this come up in French if you want. But if I just go to PowerShell, it will show me all of the various PowerShell documentation. So there's some interesting things. Here's a DSC that I mentioned. Here is standard 5.1. Here's the PowerShell gallery. I'll get into that in a few minutes. And it has all these nice little things you can do, sample scripts and the like. Now, if I go into the core documentation for PowerShell, if I go into the core documentation or the overview, what you'll see is that it has a very extensive set of writing about this. You can drop down and decide which version you want to hone in on. And if you're interested in the latest, greatest, you go to the 7.1 preview. and it will show you the new features over here that 7.1 provides. However, there's a section in here, and I recommend you all follow along. You can try and follow a little bit for the next 15 minutes, but basically there's this section called Learning PowerShell, and in there's actually a book that was written by an MVP, and they have reproduced the entire book here. I'm sure that he was compensated for that. And it takes you through all the basic stuff you'd want to do. So I'm going to go through this sort of quickly just to show you a couple things and explain why PowerShell might be useful to you. This article here, Getting Started, actually shows you how to start the various PowerShell windows, how to run as administrator, and also how to set up your taskbar so that it has the automatic run as administrator. It also says this is how you do the version table. So if I copy this, come over here and paste it, I get my version. Pretty useful. Okay, next thing that's really important to know is something called execution policy. The execution policy tells you what level you're at, and in this case, I default to something called remote sign. And it has to do with what version you're in, etc. But basically, it will let you run certain commands based on your level and whether you start as an administrator and things like that. So what I'm going to do here is, let's try this one. I just copy that and run that. And you can see that I now have a Windows time service, which right now happens to be stopped. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all this. We don't have time for all this, but if I start the service, it's that simple. And then what I can do, I'll show you later how to actually go and ask it what the level of that service is. So my recommendation to you is to go to this area of the documentation in PowerShell and run all of these examples in the PowerShell book. And you will learn very quickly the value of this tool and how it might help you in your work. So there is one of the real nice things they did in PowerShell is they put an extensive help system in it. So any command is automatically documented in very verbose language, and it explains the syntax, all of the different verbiage, and it tells you like examples and things like that. Very useful stuff. Now, I'm not going to show you all the options here, but if you wanted to do like drill down and say, I just want to know what the name parameter means, then you can actually isolate just to that part of the help information. That's pretty useful. Now this is cool, and watch how this happens. There's this thing in PowerShell called out-grid view. And if I run this, you're going to be very disappointed. Aha. Out-grid view is one of the few commands that was still not finished in version in this particular preview. And just to prove that it does work, if I go back to regular PowerShell and run the same command here, it actually does the help, and then it opens up a grid view window, and that makes a very easy to read, scrollable environment. You can take this and export this, the content and stuff, so that's pretty useful. Okay, when you're looking at help, there's ways to filter, so you can filter by a certain word like process, and there's all of the commands that have to do with processing and stuff. So that's pretty cool. So that is the world of help. Now, all the commands, they also have this thing called get command. So what if you wanted to find a command that had the word process in it? That's a way of filtering all your commands. Remember, there are 1,500 commands built in. So these all have to do with processes. So Obviously, this is how I start, stop, debug, and things like that. I can also say, you know, use some wildcard stuff and say, well, show me which ones have services. And this gets interesting because over here you see that some of these things are implemented as commandlets. Some of them are actually built-in applications on your machine, and some of them are actually functions that you've added. And by figuring that out, you can figure out exactly which one you want to run. Okay, so the next thing is objects and properties. So let's look at this simple example here. Okay, so I'm going to get the Windows time service, and you see now I know that it is clearly running. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. Everything in PowerShell, remember, is running .NET code. So when I say get service, it's like you're running a little .NET console application. That console application takes the information about the time service and turns it into a .NET object. That object has properties and methods. So if you want to see what those are, you use this syntax. You say, get me all the members of the service W32 time. And you'll see that it can close, continue, dispose. It has all these things it can do. And it has lots of properties that we can look at to know exactly what's going on. So then you'd start thinking, well, when I just said get service, why did it show me just 3 of the properties? There's got to be about 15 of them. And basically, it works sort of like toString does in .NET Framework. The person who creates the commandlet decides what the default properties are that are returned when somebody runs that commandlet. If you want to go beyond the default, you have to specifically ask for those members. So now here's an example here. Let's do this one. And here, we're going to say, give me all the properties. And this time, it returned them back in a list format. And there's an interesting rule of thumb in PowerShell. If you return back 4 things or less, it does them across, which is called table format. If you do 5 things or more, it does list format, and it just does that as a convenience because you're in a command window. Now, let's test that a little bit. If we do this, and we only have 4 things, notice they go across. But if we do this and put an asterisk, which means give me those 4 properties plus any property that begins with the word can, then it has to go down vertical because we're now exceeding 4. And there's ways to override that. You can be as exact as you want. So now this is another interesting syntax. Suppose we do this. So we're going to put it in parentheses. That's going to run the commandlet just like we did above. But what's nice about that is that we can now treat that basically as an instance of an object, and we can call its methods. And when we do that, it actually does the stop. And we know it does the stop because if we run it again, we can see that it stopped. And if you want to start it again, you just do start, and then you can go check on it, and it's now running again. So these are all different tricks that you would do to use all of this. There's another word that when I first started using PowerShell got me really confused. It's called pass-through. And what pass-through does is it allows you to take the object that you just selected, you run a method. In this case, we're not doing a .start, we're doing the commandlet version of it, which is start service. And we're going to ask it to pass through. And the difference is when you do this, it will actually return back the status of the service in addition to starting it. So obviously this is something that an IT administrator would get value out of, because they would know exactly what was started and what wasn't. So, so those are some cool things you can do. I am going to move on to the one-liners section. This is the Henny Youngman part of doing PowerShell. Now, when you're in the Windows terminal and you do multiple lines of PowerShell, as long as they're separated by a vertical bar or a backtick, it treats the whole thing as one pipeline statement. And when you run that, see, it actually ran the whole thing. And if you do an up arrow, it shows you all 3 lines. So that's what they call or refer to as a one-liner. And that's pretty useful. There are other things that you could do, and I'm not sure I want to show you all of these because we're really low on time here, but let me show you a little bit about, since a lot of you are in the coding world, let's take a look at this. Okay, what does that do? Well, what that does is basically that's like sort of doing a var in .NET Framework. It says make an object, and I don't care, you know, I'm just going to call it a custom object. I don't have to give it a specific type. Technically, you can name the type and specify it, and then you have to use the actual properties and methods of that type. But here we're going to make a type on the fly and assign it to the variable custom object. All variables in PowerShell start with a $sign. And all we're going to do here is put a string in here called W32 time. So when I do that, that's sort of cool. What happens if I just ask for custom object? It just returns back a single property with a string of name. Now, the reason that this is interesting is I can now do this. I can say, well, what members does that have? It's just a string, so it knows how to do a toString, and it knows how to give me a type and stuff like that. That's sort of interesting. Now, can I do this? Can I pass that into stop service? And the answer is yes, because it's all done by pattern or name matching. So since this object has a property called name, and stop service accepts a property called name, it says, oh, okay, I'll just take the name and I'll stop the service, and everything works fine. So that allows you to get extremely flexible with your coding. Now, this shows you another interesting technique. What if I took 2 strings and then separated them with a pipeline and did an out file? And what that does is it actually takes those strings and puts them into a text file on your machine. That's sort of useful. Why would you do that? Well, suppose you have to work with, say, 100 servers. You put them in a text file, and then you do something like this. You say, stop serve. Well, this is services, not servers. But suppose I wanted to stop 100 services, then all I would have to do is say, go out and get that file, read it in, and then pass that to stop service. And what that did is that just stopped my intelligent transfer service and my time service. Okay. Other cool things, and I'll tell you what, I'm gonna wrap this up in like 5 minutes, Rich. This is useful, the concept of modules. This is basically the PowerShell version of NuGet, and it uses a technology called PowerShell Get. And what it's going to do is it actually goes out and searches for a module in the PS gallery, which is similar to the NuGet gallery. And this is a well-known tool. So if you want to install this module, all you need to do is pass it to the install module, and then you can find it. Now, we don't have time to explain all this and where it actually gets stored, but basically there is somewhere in your Windows directory tree on your C drive, there's a place for you to store PowerShell modules and reference them that you've downloaded. Now, once you do that, you can use something, and this command is actually built into that module. And what this does is it explains to you what pipeline commands stop service actually responds to. So it can do an input of a service controller, and it can also input a name string. And the fact that it knows how to do a name string is why it worked with my custom object. So that's pretty interesting stuff. Now, basically, if you look on the right of my screen, I made it not quite halfway down the introductory training. It gets really interesting once you get to formatting and aliases, flow control. There's some very useful stuff. One of my favorites is working with WMI. If you manage a lot of servers, I guarantee you will find this interesting. If I can find the command I wanted you to show you, let's do this one here. So what does WMI do? It does stuff like this. It looks at your machine and says, oh, this is an old Dell, and the darn thing's like 8 years old, but it can actually bring up your serial number and stuff like that. Very useful if you have to have support. So what I would recommend you do, if you're at all intrigued with PowerShell, go to this tutorial, work through the examples. It's a guy that wrote a book, so the text is very well written, very explanatory. Read through these examples, you'll understand the value of it. If you manage a lot of servers in your organization, concentrate on the remoting section. If you want to write reusable scripts, if you're into DevOps or something, look at functions and script modules. Then go into deep dives. And deep dives, if you're a tried and true programmer like myself, you'll learn all about how it handles arrays, hash tables, how you make objects, how you do string processing, things like that. So most anything you do in .NET, you can do inside of PowerShell if you have the patience to figure out the syntax. So anyways, hopefully you got something useful out of this. What I will do is I'll show you one script that I have. Here's a script, and I saved this command that I did earlier as a stop time service.ps1. I put it in a certain folder. So if I go to that folder and go to PowerShell, if I do now when you run a PS1 script, you want to start with a dot, and then I'm completing with the tab. So see, that's the name of the service, the one I'm showing you on the right. And if I run that, it does exactly what I did earlier, but it basically is a repeatable script that I have stored on my server, and something I could automate. I could run it through scheduled tasks. I could run it remotely. So that's the kind of stuff that you would you'd want to use PowerShell for. So, all right, hopefully you got something out of this. We're really short on time. I want to finish up, and thank you all for attending. Hopefully we still got a couple people on the line. I'm going to open this up to Rich and Rob for any final comments they have. You guys there?
Yeah, we're here. Awesome.
So one thing, since you showed all that new stuff and installing the new PowerShell, if you do install the new PowerShell and you have installed Windows Terminal, either one, as soon as you install the PowerShell, it will add a profile into Windows Terminal so that you don't have to go and do it by hand.
So that's why I had these little drop-downy things up here.
Correct.
That's what I call them, drop-downy things.
Drop-downy things is perfectly fine.
It's a technical term.
Okay. All right. So much thanks to Rich Ross for controlling the bandwidth and turning all the knobs and dials so that we actually show up in your living rooms and family rooms, or wherever else you do your learning. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Rich and company are gonna. What are you guys gonna talk about? Do you remember?
I believe the talk is going to be, well, one of the talks is,
Rich?
oh, you guys can't hear me? Wait.
He's muting.
Wait, can you hear me now?
I think they were going to do something on Xamarin in 2 weeks.
Possibly.
If that my
Why
memory
can't you
serves
hear
me
me?
correct. 4 weeks from today, we will do another hands-on lab, and we're going to do some live share, and we might actually get some of you involved in that so that we can team program with you live on the air. That will really be embarrassing.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Oh, cool. Now you got me. Okay. Yeah. So I think actually we're trying to do something related to security, and it's kind of a partner talk between myself and a colleague of mine. So 1 month will be security. The other month will probably be developer Azure AD B2C capabilities, just seeing what that looks like. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
Excellent.
To be finalized this week.
Security is real important now that we're all at home, and people from other countries are trying to break into our home internet and turn my lights on. So.
Oh, when you have everything all wired up, that can happen, I suppose. Awesome.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rich, and we'll let everybody go. You guys have a good month. Stay safe. Wear your masks.
Yes.
Keep coding.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.